So it's finally time to retire this Commodore brick of death, which is in fact my brick of death from when I was a kid. This has powered my Commodore 64 since I had a Commodore 64, probably late 80s. And I've even been using it recently. I've been testing it every time I've used it because I know these things are incredibly heavy and incredibly likely to blow up your machine. It currently measures about 5.16 volts. I've just noticed actually as well, I don't know if you can see it there, but someone engraved their name AD, initials AD on the bottom. This was probably previously owned by one person before I got it in the 90s. I think we got the computer second hand, so somebody must have been so proud of this power supply that they engraved their name in it. Still got the original broken plug from the 90s that has chipped off and the strain relief's gone, and I kept that for prosperity. But it's finally time to retire this because I got from eBay, I got one of these new power supplies. I got this, what are they calling it? 2-in-1 Commodore 64 power supply. So it can power the 1541-2 as well. So I was considering making my own power supply, but I thought I'll get one of these because if you're making your own power supply, it's just finding the box and stuff to put it in. Or the casing is probably the hard part. So this thing supposedly can power both. So what have we got? So it's got a detachable mains cord. Yeah, I just thought we'd have a look at it just so we can see, you know, how good it is. I'll take this apart in a second and we'll see what's inside it. It's got a nice little light up power switch. What else have we got? So yeah, the power cord for the C64 is permanently attached, and we've got an optional one I think we can plug in that'll power the 1541-2 disk drive. That just takes 5 volts and 12 volts, I think. So that would go in there, would it? So I've got a 1541-2, so when I'm using that, you can plug that in as well. So that's pretty cool. So these are pretty expensive. Well, at least they were in the UK. I paid £53.99 and £16 for shipping to the UK. So it may be cheaper in your country. I think it came from Poland. Yeah, it did. It came from Poland. But I just thought it's worth it to keep the Commodore 64 safe, and it's much easier and less time consuming than building my own. So let's have a look inside it. This is not like a paid promotion or anything. I've just bought this and I thought if anyone else is thinking of buying one of these, they can, you know, go and have a look, and you know, if we open it up, you can see what's inside. So I think they showed a picture of it on the listing, and it showed, the reason I bought it, because it actually showed it's just got a Meanwhile power supply in there. So that's actually pretty cool. I mean, because if I was going to make my own, that's really what I'd do. I'd just go get a 9 volt, because this is 9 volt AC and 5 volts. So just get the 9 volt AC transformer and then stick a Meanwhile power supply with it. So they've basically done that, I think, and they've done it in quite a small form factor. This is smaller than the original. Got these nice little rubber boots on it. Oh, we're going to avoid the warranty here. Oh no, we're not, because the sticker just came off in one piece. Oh, there we go. So we've got plenty of hot glue in there. I don't know if you can see down there. Got plenty of hot glue on these connectors down here. And that's the power switch there. Hot glued the hell out of that one. Hot glued it on there as well. And what have we got? A little bit of foam to stop it vibrating. I won't take that off, but basically that's the 9 volt transformer. It's mounted on this little jaunty angle to try and fit it in or something. So that's completely deliberate. And I don't know what these are here. Are these fuses? I'm not sure what they are. They are fuses, I think. It says 400 milliamps, 250 volts. And there we are. There is our Meanwhile. That's going to give us the 5 volts. So it's an IRM-20-5. So a little that fits quite well in there, and it's got these LEDs on this little like standoff to get them up to the top of the case here. So I think so you can see them through the vent. So that all looks quite nice. Let's look at what is this thing. This is outputs 5 volts at 4 amps. So yeah, this can provide 4 amps, which is way more than the, I think that's way more than both the Commodore 64 and the disk drive would use. So that's really good. So I don't see anything really wrong with that. There's not a lot in there, but I don't suppose there ever would be. I suppose all the input protection and the over voltage protection and stuff is going to be in that Meanwhile power supply. So there you go. So it looks reasonably well constructed. Plenty of hot glue to keep everything down, even this giant transformer there. That looks pretty good, and it's about as small as you'd want to get it. And even a vent on the side there and there just to let a bit of the heat out. I don't think that meanwhile power supply probably generates much heat, but you'd probably bet to just let it vent a little bit. Okay, so this is basically Dave from the future, because what actually happened here is I was editing the video for this power supply, and then I realised that there's the 9 volts, the 12 volts and the 5 volts, because this needs to power the disk drive as well. But I was under the impression that this thing was actually going to produce the 12 volts, but it doesn't. So that means there must be more circuitry under here, under this PCB, that I've not seen yet. So I thought I'd take it apart a bit further. And that's when I also noticed that I couldn't actually get this PCB out, because it's actually screwed in and it's got hot glue over the screws. And that's the reason actually for this transformer being on a jaunty angle, is because they've moved it that way just to get the screws in. So I'm going to try and pull the hot glue off these screws if I can, and see if I can get to them, because that, I don't know why they needed to hot glue the screws, but they did. They really didn't want this thing coming apart. So look at that. So I think I've exposed one screw there, but yeah, I mean, they definitely have done a good job of making sure it doesn't move in there, but from a disassembly point of view, that's not so great. But I expect there must be a 12 volt regulator underneath this circuit board, because this thing in here only produces 5 volts. So my suspicion is going to be that they take the 5 volts and they bump it up to 12, because then they're getting some of the regulation from that meanwhile power supply. I don't think they're going to take the 9 volts and bump it up to 12. I could be wrong though. So let's just see what's actually underneath. So the 12 volts isn't going to be used for the Commodore 64. It's only going to be used for the disk drive. But it does need to come from somewhere. There we go. Hopefully that's enough to get... Yeah, it looks like there's 3 screws holding this PCB, and let's see if we can get these out. So that explains the jaunty angle. Oh, that doesn't quite fit in there. Let's try the iFixit toolkit. Let's see if there's something in here that'll do it. Oh yeah, iFixit for the win. It's not sponsored. That went in. That looked like it went in at a little bit of an angle, but we'll see. So yeah, I like the use of the hot glue until I'm trying to take it apart, and then I'm not a fan of it. Is that going to come out now? It's still in there. Is that the glue holding it in? Could be the glue holding that in now. I do want to use this, so I'm trying not to destroy it. But I'm doing this so you don't have to. Wow, it's really held in. It's definitely wiggling a bit. Right, let me stop the camera and I'll have a go getting this thing out, because it's clearly a 2-pipe problem. So here it is. This is the bottom side. It was actually all just glued in. It was the glue that was holding this in. It wasn't anything else. This is plugged in, but it's not powered up at the moment, because this could be dangerous if I did that. But there's quite a bit more in here than I expected. They've got this little like board that's like standing off from the main board by about 1 centimeter. And this board here is doing the 12 volt regulation. And I've just checked, and yeah, it is actually taking the 5 volts from the meanwhile power supply. It's putting it through this regulator here on this separate board, and then it's outputting the 12 volts up here on this end. And then that must route its way back down here out to the 12 volts, which is just output down here. They also got a big cap on there, which smooths the output on 5 volts. As for the rest of it, I'm not exactly sure what a lot of it is. We've got some kind of input protection there. The 9 volts from the AC does just come straight down there and outputs there to the C64. The 5 volts is coming out of the meanwhile, and I suspect that it's actually being routed through some parts down here. I think that might be a fuse or something. So I think they've actually put a fuse on the bottom. But basically, yeah, they've gone in. 5 volts is coming out of the meanwhile there, routed through this regulator, comes out as 12 volts, comes down here. There seems to be a 5 volt fuse, I think, and the rest of it, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I can just turn this on now, hopefully without killing myself. So there is mains voltage in here, so I've got to be really careful. So switch that on. Now you can maybe see that this little board down here probably wasn't designed specifically for this power supply, because they've put a little LED on it, which you could never see if it was inside the box. But if I actually just take a quick look without electrocuting myself, yeah, so there's the 12 volts that's coming out of that side on that one. And on the inputs are here. There we go. So on the input, that's the 5.2 volts that's coming from the Meanwhile power supply through a little bit of regulation, coming out as the 12 volts there. And then down here, the 5 volts, that's the 5 volts. The ground is this bit here. So this big thing here is the ground. But we've got a 5 volts there, have we? Is that the one? That's the ground. 5 volts is there, and 12 volts is right next to it there, that's going out to the disk drive. Oh, sorry, no, it's 5 volts for the disk drive and 12 volts for the disk drive. So I think the 5 volts is actually going through this, which I think might be a fuse. I'm not exactly sure. I looked up the part and I couldn't find out what it was. So I think there might be some fusing and just extra protection on there, and obviously that's doing the smoothing. Let me just turn it off. Yeah, there's a lot more underneath than I thought there was going to be. But yeah, as I suspected, they are taking the... I thought they were just going to take the output of the 5 volts from the Meanwhile and just put it through like a linear regulator. But it looks like that's probably a switching regulator there. So they're putting the 12 volts through a switching regulator. So that's... all this extra circuitry in here is probably really only for this model with the 12 volts for the disk drive. If you buy the one that doesn't need any of this board's not going to be there, is it? So probably that part will be missing. And they have stood it off from the bottom, maybe just to get keep it away from the heat or something like that. Or maybe just because it's been built as a separate board and that's the only place it would fit. But there you go, so that's what's underneath. So the rest of the video will carry on now, bearing in mind that I hadn't seen underneath it in the rest of the video. Let's just put it back together and then we'll give it a go. I could try and measure the voltage output from it, but I think because that's going to be a switching power supply, I probably won't measure anything. So I might just have to plug it in and give it a go. I could measure the voltages inside the computer. I could take the risk. I think that's going to work. I'd trust it. Although it's possible they could have wired it up wrong, so we could test that. Who knows? But yeah, I quite like the design of it. I quite like having just one power supply for this and the disk drive as well. And you get this little leaflet. Oh, it's actually even telling you. So what have we got? So yeah, the connections for the 1541-2 is just 12 volts and 5 volts. For the C64, 5 volts. Oh yeah, 5 volts and ground. 5 volts ground, and there's the AC. Okay, that makes sense. Maybe we can try and measure that and just see if it will give us any output without a load connected. I don't think it will though, because I think this switching power supply will not do anything unless there's a load connected to it. So, I don't see that coming on. Is that a light up switch? Maybe that doesn't light up. Oh yeah, we've got some LEDs there. So I thought that would light up, but it looks like it's supposed to, but it doesn't. But I can see the LEDs in there are lit up. I don't know, why do I need 2 LEDs? Amber and green? I don't know why I need 2 LEDs. Is it one for the AC, one for the DC? Don't know. Either way, it's on there. Let's see if we can measure something. It's really the DC that we're interested in. There's a fuse inside the C64 for the 9 volts AC. So if that overloads, it should blow the fuse. But the 5 volts goes to all the chips. So if that goes wrong, then we are in trouble. Is there some goop in here? It's just fluff. Let's see if we can measure anything on this. Let's turn it on. Might not measure anything because of the, like I said, because of the switching power supply. Oh yeah, oh, it's 5.25 volts. That's pretty high, I think. Oh. But then again, it's got no load, so this thing's expected to have a load, so I think that'll drop under the load. So we could measure that in the computer, but I expect that to drop. So that's higher than the output of the Brick of Death. But I suspect once we load it, it's probably not accurate unless it's completely loaded. Let's just test the AC as well. The AC will be a bit high as well because it's got no load. Should be getting 9 volts. It's 10. So that's acceptable because again, once it loads down, it'll probably go closer to 9. So I'm happy to plug that in, and I think what I'll do is once we get it in, I'll measure the voltage inside the computer and we'll see what that 5.25 drops to when it's actually under load in the actual computer. I expect it'll be a lot more accurate than that. So I'll set the computer up now and then we'll come back to it. Actually, take that back, one more thing. I should test the outputs for the disk drive as well, because we need 5 volts and 12 volts on that one. So what have we got? So I suspect we'll get the same 5.25 volts on the disk drive. Yeah, that's the same for the disk drive, 5.25, and we're expecting 12 volts for 12.4. 12.4. Again, so I suspect because this isn't under load, they'll get better as it powers up. So that's what I'll try now. Okay, so I've got a very yellow Commodore C64C plugged in. First test I'll do is I'll just turn the switch off on the power supply, and then I'll just turn this on and make sure the switch works. So that doesn't turn the computer on, that's correct. And I'll turn that switch on and then we'll just see if we power up. And the answer is, yes we do, there we go. We've got a Commodore 64 looking quite nice. That totally works. I haven't plugged the disk drive in yet. Let me just turn that off for now. And the reason I haven't is because I can't get this cable to plug in. I tried to do it before. Let me just move this out of the way. I was trying to plug this cable in to the power port and neither end wants to go. Just neither end wants to go in here. It's just not happening. I think this thing might be a bit out of shape. So that's a problem. Yeah, both ends are just refusing to go in. So I don't know if they just look a little bit bent to me. I think maybe they're not quite round. Let's just try that. So the Commodore 64 cable plugged in fine, but this one I'm having to putting a lot of force on and it's not going in. So I'm afraid I'm going to damage the drive. I mean, it's plugging in this fine, but this has clearly got a much bigger tolerance. Yeah, so it's going in there fine. And that end's going in fine. But yeah, so that's obviously a much bigger port than this one, which for some reason, it just doesn't want to go in. So let's just have another look, see if I can see what's wrong with this. It's just super tight. Yeah, that's not good. Oh, is it going in? Oh, it's going in, yeah, right. So it does go in. It's just incredibly tight in that port. I mean, probably what you want from a power port, but just to be aware, it does go in there, barely. So let's reconnect this. Okay, so in theory, this is going to power the drive and it's going to power the computer. So I'll turn the power supply on. And the drive, yep, drive's on, and computer's on. So that looks pretty good. So far I've got no disk in there. Whoops. So it did try to list the disk there, but I'll put a disk in and make sure that works. I've got a driller disk that I know works, haven't I? So I'll put that in. Ah, there we go. So it's totally working. There's not really too much of a surprise there. This has got this matte grey soundtrack, this game. It's really good. So I think what I'll do is I'll pop the lid off the C64 and then we'll measure some voltages inside the computer on one of the chips. And we'll see what voltage we're getting when it's under load doing stuff. And I'm hoping it's closer to the 5 volts than the 5.25, which is probably like the upper range you wanted. But like I said, these switching power supplies don't work like that. If they're not under load, they're not going to give you the correct voltages. They need to be loaded to be within the correct tolerance. So let me just pop the hood off this now. So computer is on, and I'm just going to check the voltage on the processor. Let's try not to blow anything up with the probes. Oh, there you go. So it's 5.034 volts on the processor. So the voltage has correctly regulated down when it's inside the computer. So that 5.25, yeah, is just what it's putting out when it's not under load, so it's not regulated correctly. And even that would technically be acceptable for a Commodore 64. It would work. You'd be driving the chips a bit hard, but it would work. But as you can see, it's very close to 5 volts. So there it is. That is the, it's a C64 PSU 2-in-1, which I actually got from eBay. But I'll put the link in the description. And yeah, that works quite well. The only thing that's a bit of a problem really has been this connector on the disk drive, which has been difficult to get in. I think once it's been in and out a few times, that'll probably be all right. But it does technically work, but I did have to put a lot of force on there. So that's my only problem with it. But as it stands, yeah, I much prefer this to the Brick of Death. I'm much more confident that I can use this without having to measure the power supply every time. And if we check the specs for this, I'm sure this has got over voltage protection and fuses and stuff like that in there from the Meanwhile power supply. They make high quality power supplies. So yeah, that's it. That's just a quick look at this power supply. I like it. It's expensive, but to be honest, the amount of time it would take you to build your own and to build it, you know, of this reasonable quality might be worth it for you. So check one out if you're interested. But yeah, quite like it.